Let's talk about a fantasy novel called The Face in the Frost by John Bellairs from the early 1960s. John Bellairs became a really popular and respected sort of youth novelist, writing ghost stories, horror stories, things of that nature. The best known is called The House with a Clock in Its Walls, and he did a dozen or so like that before his death. But The Face in the Frost is his major foray into a fantasy novel aimed mostly older, and it's beautiful. It's a masterwork of fantasy fiction, and partly I think that's because it came out before the success of Lord of the Rings in the United States, before fantasy as a genre had sort of coalesced into various commercial themes and tropes. And so Bellairs was able to work with just a much more open, fluid sense of what a fantasy novel could be about. Oh, I hear somebody coming. Hang on, I gotta stop. Okay, back on Face in the Frost. Okay, Face in the Frost is a short novel. It's only about 200 pages. I believe it's still in print, but don't guarantee that. And the thing that makes it special relates to some of the character tropes in fantasy and how it goes against one of the big ones. And one of the big tropes in the kind of epic fantasy literature, which Face in the Frost is reasonably epic fantasy. There is a fair amount at stake. There's this like dark power that's moving over the land and causing immense problems, like shifting with the seasons, threatening to start wars. But it's all kept at a distance. But there are very high stakes for the world. But the thing that makes it special is in epic fantasy, the magician or the wizard or the sage character is usually fairly distant from normal human concerns and normal human psychology. They're not a very relatable character, and they usually aren't the character that the reader is expected to identify with. The prototype of this is Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. Gandalf isn't even human. He's like a spirit sent from the other world to help Middle-earth. We never really live inside his head. Like, I can't remember him ever expressing a feeling. He has a little bit of a sense of humor, but he is there to sort of provide information, to drive the plot along, to explain what's going on. It's not like what real person would become a wizard. Well, Face in the Frost goes the other way. Face in the Frost gives you the best portrait in kind of commercial fantasy that I know of the kind of real human being who becomes a wizard, and that's Prospero. Prospero, is the main character, Face in the Frost. He's not Prospero from The Tempest. Bellairs even makes a joke about that. He just happens to have the same name. And we live in we experience the story through his eyes, and he's a wonderful portrait of the kind of human being who might really be drawn to try to learn something like magic. He's inventive. He's very playful. He's not power hungry. He just likes sort of knowing how things work. He collects strange things. He studies strange, odd bits of information. He's the prototype for the magician characters, the benevolent magician characters anyway, who would appear in in Bellairs' later youth novels. There's usually like a sort of benevolent scholar character who helps the youthful heroes with their adventures in those books. But they're not, in those books, they aren't the main characters. The kids are the main characters. In this one, Prospero gets to be the main character. And we get to see, how he thinks and how he draws connections. And he's just a charming person. He has friends. He has concerns about the wider world. He has pets. He gets irritated and aggravated with little daily things like the rest of us. His approach to problems is, indirect. He really doesn't know what's going on most of the book. It's only until quite late in the story that he fully understands what has been happening. He's primarily reactive. and he has that let's get an idea and test it out attitude. It's not a bad picture either of the kind of person who becomes a scientist or any really deeply inventive artist. And all the links, we had a wonderful picture of his house, for example. That's what the book leads with, is we find Prospero in his home, and we learn about him primarily, through this house that he lives in. You sort of learn what kind of person would just live among all this clutter and all these clocks and all these weird bits, but who also enjoys, poetry and baseball and the sun, just all sorts of things. He's just a omni-interested person. And within that, we get a really fun story that alternates between sort of tension and amusement, that has really well-crafted short chapters that don't drag out elements. The story keeps hopping. There isn't any wasted time. Prospero has a friend named Roger Bacon. Roger Bacon was an actual person who supposedly built a brass head that could foretell the future. So it's kind of like, what if Roger Bacon had wandered into this other world, which is similar to medieval Europe, but not medieval Europe in the fantasy tradition. They meet interesting people for the moments. They have these strange encounters with different kinds of dark magic, and the dark magic is really presented well. This is one of the hallmarks of Bellairs' writing in his youth novels as well, is the darkness feels dark because it's left unspoken. It's not over-explained. It doesn't happen too often to lose its power to shock. And in Face in the Frost, the dark power is fairly strong, and at first Prospero has no clear conception of where it's coming from or what it's about or how best to counter it. He just has to meet it where it is. And so we get a great deal of that kind of tremor of encountering the unknown, which underlies for me some of the best of sort of supernatural literature, ghost literature, darkness. It's that feeling of there's something else going on here, and to discover what it was might almost be to suffer whatever power that it can bring to bear against you. So it's a great feeling, and it's a charming story. It's not suffused with this feeling. It alternates back and forth between Prospero's read on the situation and his journey through this land. The land is well drafted. It's not overly invested with lore or anything, but it has some, enough to keep you interested and to hold your attention and to make it a real place. And Prospero's home is fun. There's a lot to enjoy in this book. I think Ursula Le Guin called it one of the best works of fantasy she'd ever read, and I would put it up there too, especially for standalone fantasy, which is a genre that's been kind of trapped in series fiction ever since Lord of the Rings showed that you could sell trilogies and so on. So I get very excited when I find a really good standalone fantasy that does not attempt to be part of a larger series storyline. And I highly recommend this one, Face in the Frost, John Bellairs.